we bring you Killer Wives, Episode 17, Intruder. These are the case facts against Jane Lout, who shot and killed her own husband. Isn't trust a bitch? Oxnard, California. A picturesque community famous for the Channel Islands Harbor, Mandalay State Beach, and for the murder of former Olympic bronze medalist Dave Lout.
Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant. You have a callback for 86 into Central? Negative K, nothing further. Just see the cabbie in the corner.
Shortly after midnight on August the 28th of 2009, in a peaceful community of Oxnard, California, Jane Lout was frantically telling a 911 dispatcher that her husband, Dave Lout, may just have been shot by an intruder, as evident by this 911 call.
911 emergency. Was in our backyard. Alright, what's the person look like that was in your backyard? I didn't see it, but there were shots. There were shots. You're just being fired? Yeah. I don't know. I want you to stay inside the house. How many shots did you hear? I don't know. Like one, two, a bunch? I don't know. What? Where did you left your husband? So we went to the store and he told me to get back in. Of course, before I get back in, and then I heard the shot. I went to let it get he's still asleep. Okay, don't make him up to shit, okay? The must have been going. Are you able to see the picture at all? Stay with me about the center. If you want to stand there when you stay inside the house.
Now, although some of the conversation is inaudible on that 911 call, we can give you now the actual case facts of the night of August the 27th, 2009, without Jane's pretense or drama. At about 11:30 p.m., Miss Jane Lout followed her husband outside of the patio door of their home with the manufactured alert that she had seen the shadow of a prowler in the side yard. Her husband of 29 years had no reason to doubt Jane's veracity, so he decided to confront the prowler. Halfway around the side of the house, Mr. Lout, seeing that Jane was still directly behind him, told her to go back into the house with their son in order to stay safe. She did not. In fact, Jane continued to follow behind Mr. Lout with a flashlight in one hand and his .22 caliber revolver in the other in case they needed to confront this prowler. Jane brought up the flashlight at shoulder height to shine forwards in the direction her husband was leading. She then trained that .22 revolver against the forward direction in the direction of the prowler. Jane then, without hesitation, pulled the trigger and shot her husband on the left side rear of his skull, just above his ear. Now, was this an accident? It might have been if it were not for the fact that she moved forward over her husband's kneeling body, then placed that gun to the side of his head and shot him twice more. These were labeled as contact wounds in subsequent autopsies, as the coroner found stripling near the wounds in the case. Now, this was not an accident. And then Jane commenced to unload the revolver, starting with the fourth shot while her husband is dead, flat on the ground. She unapologetically stood at least 4 to 6 feet away and shot him just for sport. For the 5th shot, Jane decided to shoot her husband squarely in the back of the shoulder, and the 6th and final to the back of his head. A classic case of overkill and overkill, if I've ever heard it. Yes, Miss Lott shot her husband Dave Lott, the man she once promised to love, honor, and cherish, with his own .22 caliber single-action handgun 5 times at their private residence. At the time of his death, the 52-year-old was an athletic director at his high school in Oxnard and husband, father to a 10-year-old boy. The Lotts were married for 29 years on the day she murdered him. But no time for remorse on Miss Lott's behalf. Time was of the essence right now. After shooting her husband, Miss Lott ran inside of the house, where her then 10-year-old boy was still asleep upstairs. In the house, she located a grandfather clock, opened the door, put the gun at the bottom of that clock. She hid it. She then didn't have much time before the police would arrive to plan her alibi. So she set out to destroy all evidence of her involvement in her husband's death. This incident in her mind must be framed as a mysterious prowler and not as a trusting and demure wife. In the upstairs bathroom, she hurriedly proceeded to wash off any evidence of the killing. Now this is what is known as anticipation of that investigation. When she was sure she had covered everything the cops would inspect for, she went to her bedroom to change her clothing. As her husband's body lay outside, chilling to the elements and vulnerable to animals, she took her bloody clothing downstairs to the basement wash machine and placed them inside. But she forgot to turn the wash machine on. You see, obviously Miss Lott was well aware that forensics would want to test her clothing for blood splatters as well as for gunshot residue. Now, this brings us back to the false anxiety she exhibited during the 911 call, where she gave the operator her most passionate plea of a grieving spouse. In fact, if there were an Academy Award for faking care and innocence, she would go home that night as most favored actress. If you remember, during that 911 call, Miss Lott told the operator that she heard gunshots and that there was a possible intruder in the backyard. In continuing part of their conversation, the operator asked if there were any weapons in the home of which the officers should be aware of. Miss Lott replied no. All the guns were locked in the gun safe, she said. She neglected to tell her that she just hid one in the clock. She told the operator that she and her son were in the house and that her husband had gone outside. She did not mention that she went outside with him the whole time, directly behind him. Now, when Oxnard police officer Crenshaw and Jason Graham arrived at the house, Lott was still on the phone with the 911 operator. They could see her inside of the house. She was sobbing. They could hear her say, "I see shadows. I see shadows." And he, meaning her husband, didn't come back inside. He went outside. He didn't come back inside, she said. Now, when the police contacted Lott by way of the front side of the house, she told him that her husband went outside through the back rear sliding door and did not come back inside. So with this, the police went out the back door with weapons drawn. The officers searched the backyard and both sides of the house. They found Dave's body on the side of the house, on the ground, and a pool of blood around his face. He was dead. Because Dave was lying on his stomach with his arms under him, the police thought that he could be holding a gun, and that the gunshot to the side of his face might have been a self-inflicted wound. Officer Larry Eklund responded to Lott's residence shortly thereafter. Officer Graham told him that it looked like a shooting, possibly self-inflicted. Eklund asked Lott if there were any weapons in the house. She told him all the weapons were in the gun safe the second time. Lott asked Eklund if her husband was all right. Eklund told her he had been shot, possibly self-inflicted. She kept saying, "He was shot?" as if she couldn't understand. Acting, ladies and gentlemen, acting. Now, Officer Eklund asked Lott if she and her husband were having any problems. Lott said no, nothing out of ordinary, just what every normal couple goes through. Lott said Dave had not told her anything that would indicate he was planning to harm himself as of late. What she did not tell officers was that her husband had been researching how to get a divorce from his wife on the internet for the past 3 weeks. He wanted out of this relationship, and that night he was going away. What she also did not mention to officers was that she had a very big spending habit that put them deeply into debt and his wages into garnishing. Finally, She did not tell officers that she stood to gain $300,000 in a life insurance policy on her husband, along with benefits she would receive in case of his death. Miss Lott was the sole beneficiary of those funds, and she had a heavy spending habit that needed replenishing constantly. Police Sergeant Jeffrey Matthews arrived at the house shortly thereafter. He viewed Dave's body and determined that one shot entered Dave's back. That eliminated suicide in his book. Matthews knew there was a shooter somewhere. Matthews asked Lott where she was at the time of her husband's shooting. She said Dave had gone into the yard and that she had remained inside by the sliding glass door. Now, this was different than she told television interviewers after being incarcerated much later. She continues her story to the officers, which she heard Dave say outside, "What the F?" Then she heard 3 shots. 3 shots. Remember, when the 911 operator asked her how many shots she heard, she was unclear. Officer Matthews contacted other sergeants to coordinate a canvass of the area in search of a shooter. Now, Officer Eklund was in the kitchen with Lott. Lott went to the sink and got a glass of water to drink. She took another drink of water without a glass by cupping her hands under the faucet, even though the glass was still nearby. This was a nervous woman. Detective Sandra Pilmer arrived and sat at the kitchen table with Lott. Now, Matthews placed a gunshot residue kit or GSR kit on the table in front of Lott. Lott looked at the kit and asked to use the bathroom. Officer Pilmer escorted her, and Lott returned to the table. The officer was busy preparing the GSR kit when she noticed that Lott was back into the bathroom. She took off running. The officer ran after her and found her in the bathroom washing her hands. She wiped them on a towel. Did this one conscious act point towards Mrs. Lott's guilt? Now, the officer told her to stop. Lott apologized and said she had forgotten to wash her hands. Now, back downstairs in the kitchen, the officer finally tested Mrs. Lott's hands for gunshot residue. But would it be too late after 3 washings? Now, we will never know, for the officer made one huge mistake in the police line of investigation. She failed to put a barcode on that kit, and police lost that kit. Now, at the house, neither Matthews nor the officer noticed any signs of injury towards Lott's body, nor did she complain of any. The house showed no signs of altercation. Now, I ask you to remember this later, because you see, once Miss Lott decides to change her story to a Prowler, she's going to do a different joke on it. Now, the officer then transported Lott to the police station and placed her in an interview room. Another officer, Detective Erica Mora, conducted the interview. Lott told Mora she heard a bump just prior to Dave going outside and that she saw shadows in the yard. Upon questioning, she denied her relationship with her deceased husband was physically or emotionally abusive. Remember, Mora told her there were some things she was leaving out and asked her to tell what really happened. Officer Mora, being a seasoned detective, told Miss Lott the only question was, why did these things happen? Now, Miss Lott, out of the blue, denied that she killed her husband. It wasn't me. After the interview, a detective, Sonia Sanchez, took Lott to a dressing room to collect Lott's clothing for examination. Sanchez gave Lott a jumpsuit to wear. Now, you see, Miss Lott, I'm sure, was not worried. Sure enough, she had seen enough detective shows to know that police seized the clothing you are wearing after murder for examination. Remember, she changed them earlier just for that purpose. When Lott took off her shirt, Officer Sanchez noticed 2 very small contusions on Lott's upper left arm. One was 1 inch, and the other one was 1/2 inch in diameter. When Sanchez asked Lott how the injury occurred, Lott said a dog did it. The police charged with investigating the case executed a search warrant on Lott's residence. Documents discovered in that residence revealed Lott and her husband were having financial difficulties. The documents included letters from collection agencies and a notice of wage garnishment for unpaid taxes. But it was Miss Lott who handled all of the family's finances. Now, the police also discovered a life insurance policy naming Dave as the insured and Lott as the sole beneficiary. Downstairs, the police discovered a critical piece of evidence when they found the .22 caliber revolver hidden in the grandfather closet. In a subsequent autopsy, bullets fired from that revolver matched bullets found in Dave's body. Now, I'm guessing that Miss Lott forgot to remove all 6 of the empty shells in the revolver's breech. The police also recovered a computer from the house. A computer forensics examiner would later on find searches for divorce, and for a divorce attorney under Dave's user account. The police found unwashed clothing in the laundry where she accidentally forgot to turn it on. The clothes tested positive for gunshot residue and the blood of Miss Lott's deceased husband. Now, in her haste to cover up her crime, she had forgotten to start the washer. These slight forensic comedy of errors would prove to be Mrs. Lott's undoing. Forensic pathologist Dr. Ronald O'Halloran conducted an autopsy on Dave's body. There were 5 bullet wounds, including 4 to her husband's head. One of the wounds went from the back of the head through the brain and likely caused death. That wound was created when the gun was an inch or 2 away from his head, as indicated by soot deposited in Dave's hair. There was a 6th wound that O'Halloran believed was caused by blunt force trauma to Dave's head, although it could have been caused by a bullet glancing off his head, which I believe was the first shot from behind, for a total of 6. Now, that night, Carlos and Esther Ananya, the immediate neighbors from Lott's house, were so close together that they sometimes say they heard conversations coming from the Lott's house. The neighbors were awake at the time of the shooting. Now, this is critical. The neighbors heard the gunshots, but they did not hear any voices raised in anger before or after the shoot. Now, this will be critical in trying Miss Lott at trial. Remember, no voices in anger or screams of help. But at the police station, Miss Lott, without knowing that the police just found the murder weapon at the house, inside of the closet, decided to shift her story from one direction to the other. Lott will go for the oldest trick in the Killer Wife's Handbook. When the police got too close to her for murder, she decided to protect herself and claim self-defense. That's right, self-defense. And becoming a victim in a murder scene with a dead man just besmirch his character and paint him as the worst man that ever walked the face of the earth. As a wife, you win self-defense. Now, the following statements she will utter are no more than a preamble to admitting that she killed her husband, but in self-defense now, based upon her being a battered wife. In this new recollection of marriage up to the killing, Miss Lott will confess that she and her husband began dating in college and married in 1980. From early in the marriage, she says now that Dave was verbally and physically abusive to her. Now, notice a minute before, in the same interview, she said her husband was never abusive. In fact, you would be challenged to find anyone, and I do say anyone, that knew Dave before the killing to corroborate her story. She said Dave blamed his abusive behavior on the drugs he was taking during the 1984 Olympics, where he won a bronze medal in shot put. But the abuse continued even after he stopped training, she said. The abuse, she said, included beatings, forced anal copulation, and anal rape. After unsuccessful attempt to have a child, the Lotts adopted a son from Korea because Miss Lott was incapable of conceiving. She says that Dave was verbally abusive and physically aggressive towards her son. Now, you can find nobody who will corroborate this also. This, too, was a lie. She says at one point in the past, Dave killed their son's pet turtles and threatened to kill the family's dog. This also was a lie. She says that Dave made a racist comment about their son. Simply a continuation of lies to save her from going to jail for what she had just done. And Lott continued that on August 27, 2009, the day of the murder, she took her son to the beach that day for fun in the sun. That evening, she says the two of them arrived home after Dave, and Dave was angry she was not there when he arrived home. She prepared a hamburger, she said, for Dave. He threw it at her and told her to make another one, right? And abuse her. By this time, she said it was late. Dave sat in a chair muttering to himself and later yelling. The tension in the house was thick, she said. Lott says she went into her son's room to watch TV with him because he was scared. Dave, she says, was still in the living room talking to himself. Then Dave came into the hallway near their son's door. She heard him saying something about her. I'm sick of her and this fucking shit. Her words. I'm so sick of this shit. Lott looked out into the hallway, she said. Dave came closer to her. She saw he had a handgun in his hand. He kept saying, I'm sick of you, sick of this shit. Both of you have no respect. Now, he told her that little fucker in the room, meaning his son, I want to blow his fucking little head off. And you are going to watch. Imagine. He would say something like this. Now, in her fanciful story that no court would buy, she said that Dave used a gun, waved it around, yelling, Now, he repeated that he was going to blow their son's head off. Law says she then went into the living room and onto the patio. As a heroic motherly gesture, she was trying to get Dave out of the house and away from their son, she says. They followed her out and told her to get back into the house. In continuing her fanciful story, she says Dave slipped on the edge of the patio. When he slipped, Lot pushed his leg with her foot. He grabbed Lot by the arm and they started to fall. She grabbed his hand and that was holding the gun. She pushed the gun away from her face, and at that point, she says, they both had their hands on the gun. She heard 2 shots go off. She did not know if those shots hit him. They both fell to the ground, she says. Her leg was under his when they fell. She tried to push him off, but he kept coming after her. She thought he was going to kill her. So she shot him 3 more times. She went into the house and put the gun into the clock. At that point, she did not think that Dave was dead. She called 911 because she thought he was hurt. She admitted she lied to the police about there being an intruder. She said she wanted time to get her son out of the house and to her family. Now, she neglected to mention that she never woke him up before, during, or after the murder. Law's testimony lacked credibility. Why? Because initially she told the police that Dave was shot by the intruder. Her lies to police showed a consciousness of guilt and severely diminished the credibility of her belated claims of self-defense. It more sounded like something you would see in a novel or a movie, this whole story she just described. Moreover, Law asked the jury to believe that she was able to wrestle control of a gun from a former Olympic shot putter. Finally, the gun Law used was a single-action revolver. Pulling the trigger alone would not cause it to shoot. Each time she shot, Law had to pull back the hammer before pulling the trigger. It shows Law's actions were purposeful and not accidental, as with the fast-action automatic weapon. Now, in addition, Dave was shot once in the back of the head at close range, showing the shooting was not self-defense as she had stated. Jane's defense attorney, as with the advice of most lawyers in these cases to their clients, is to lean heavily upon the battered wife syndrome, whether it is true or not. That's not up to me. Now, Jane's defense argued that she had been beaten and raped during the entire 29 years of marriage, and that on the night of the killing, her husband slammed her head against the wall, without leaving a mark, mind you, and threatened her and her 10-year-old son with that revolver. Jane testified that her husband was shot as the couple struggled for the gun. In his opening statement, defense attorney Ron Bynum told jurors that they were involved in life and death struggle. See, life and death struggle. Jane testified that she was the first to get up after that struggle, and that her husband was trying to get up to his knees when she started firing. There was no aiming, the lawyer said, no looking, no pre-planning. Her lawyer continued on, if her husband gets up, she knew she was done, and Michael, her son, was done as well. His wife, in her version of the story, said he kept coming and he would not stop. But the prosecution was clear to the jury that Dave was shot 6 times, including in the back of the head with a gun that had to be cocked before each shot. Prosecutors also contended that Jane lied to police about the shooting and stood to gain $300,000 from her husband's insurance. Ms. Lott spent 6 long days at trial testifying in her own defense, a record for one of these cases. But after all was said and done, the jury did not buy her fanciful stories about being battered by a former Olympic medal winner and coach. They saw through her. They saw through her story to cover up the murder and sentenced her as guilty of the crime of murder. Ms. Lott, who had previously turned down 5 plea deals from the state, with the last one being to 6 years jail, that's it, for manslaughter. She was now sentenced to jail for 50 years without the possibility of parole. At Mrs. Lott's advanced age of 59 years, her time in jail is a death sentence, which is similar to what she accorded her husband the day she shot him. For the Men's Channel, thank you for watching. See you next time on Killer Wives.